Hello, I'm Michael Pierce, and this is The Human Condition. Today, our topic is one asked about a lot. It's the effects of heavy metals on the brain and the body, the types of symptoms and downstream problems that can occur after a person experiences a heavy metal overload, which is usually a chronic type of thing, although most of what we know about heavy metals comes from acute overloads from the mining industry. The topic has been asked about by quite a number of people, and they wanted us to repeat it because there's so much to talk about and so much to go through. So, we begin the idea of heavy metals by looking at biochemistry. And essentially, when you look at the cycles of biochemistry, you learn that most of the enzymes that are produced by genes are blocked by heavy metals. So, what that means is if you're into SNPs, let's say you're into looking at single nucleotide polymorphisms, you like SNPs. You get a cheek swab, you stick a cotton swab in your mouth, and you collect some cells and you send it to a lab. You've heard of 23andMe and other types of labs, and you get a result, and it gives you a bunch of SNPs. Maybe you look at your raw data, maybe you go to a free site or a low cost site, and you interpret your SNPs and you discover that you've got some particular single nucleotide polymorphisms, which are little errors that you inherited from one parent or another or from both. And so you decide you're going to do something about that. And you think you know what's going on with your body because you've got this knowledge of what are your normal SNPs, what are your or normal nucleotides, your SNPs that are from one parent, but the other parent's normal, and then the SNPs that are homozygous, which means an error from both parents at the same site in the DNA. So you think you know that you've got a problem, or you think you know that you're fine. And then you discover that you've got some symptoms related to a particular enzyme that you've been studying. And you say, man, this doesn't add up. I don't have those SNPs. I'm not supposed to have this problem. Well, it could be that you've got a heavy metal toxicity. So, heavy metals, and there's a number of them, but things like arsenic and cadmium and lead and mercury. And then there's others that are not quite considered heavy metals, but they're aluminum and other types of metals that we have built up in our lives, like nickel. These are things that are arguably common metals, but some of them are classically toxic and some are less toxic. But they all show problems depending on where they go in our bodies. Now, what happens is these particular heavy metals tend to mess up enzymes. Now, enzymes have this lock and key mechanism. They have this system that lets them run and operate. And if they can get triggered and made to work, what they do is they bond to some molecule and they grab a hold of it and they grip it so that they can manipulate it. They want to actually change that molecule and either add or take away some section of that chemistry. They want to add atoms to that molecule. They want to add carbons and hydrogens and oxygens and double bonds and single bonds and nitrogen. And they want to wrestle that molecule into changing it into something else. Now, the enzyme itself is supposed to, in a perfect world, have cofactors. And the cofactors are minerals, good minerals, minerals that we need, minerals that help us, minerals that are not poisonous. Things like magnesium and calcium and zinc and copper. And certainly you can get too much or too little of those minerals, but they're not known as toxic. They're not known as heavy metals. So if you're deficient in those around 70 basic minerals and trace minerals, you can have problems with your enzymes and your SNPs won't matter. Likewise, if you have heavy metal toxicity, your SNPs won't matter and your enzymes won't matter and things won't get better. And you'll have a body that breaks all the rules. If you were to look at the rules of biochemistry, if you were to read textbooks on clinical biochemistry about how things are supposed to work, especially the B vitamins, all of the B complex vitamins, you might notice that they don't work the way they're supposed to, or they work for a certain period of time. In fact, patients will take B vitamin and they'll notice that they feel better for 3 or 4 weeks. And then things start to fail again because what they've done is they've taken an extra B vitamin and they've depleted what little trace mineral that they have that is the component or helper molecule, basically, the helper atom for that B vitamin. And they've depleted the mineral. So they may have taken B12 and they've depleted magnesium or lithium, and they now can't use the B12 anymore. So the B12 starts to fail to work after a few weeks because of the depletion of the cofactor, the mineral, lithium or magnesium or whichever mineral is in question. And there's more than one mineral in question. It's not just one for each vitamin. So that's why you might notice that your vitamins don't work or herbs don't work after a certain period of time, and that they work for a short period of time and then they fizzle out. So if you've got an enzyme site or a receptor site in a cell clogged by a heavy metal, you are going to end up not being able to use that site. So we have to purge those heavy metals from our bodies. It's really kind of necessary to think about If those heavy metals are in cells, they have to be driven out of the cell. And one of the ways that cells take heavy metals out is with alpha lipoic acid. Alpha lipoic acid is a chemical cousin of the B vitamins, and it's very similar to water soluble B vitamins. It's pretty mild, although it can give some symptoms like nearly anything can if you take too much of it. But the typical dose for most people that are trying to help their peripheral nerves and their liver and their heavy metals is around 600 milligrams a day. Many people that are really sensitive don't take that much a day because they have to start out with a microdose. If you've been listening to me at all, you know that a microdose is really important because a lot of people are super sensitive and they can't start with the average dose that most people take. And by the way, for supplements, we call this a serving size, not a dose, because it's not a drug. It's not a medicine. It's not a treatment. It is really a lifestyle and food factor. And food is measured in, serving size, not measured in dose. But, if you use the word dose, I'm not going to worry about it. So if you've got a problem with heavy metals and you take alpha lipoic acid is something that helps your cells pull heavy metals out of the cell and remove them through the cell membrane, because the cell membrane is the key for everything. The cell membrane is the key for how everything works, because essentially the brain of your cell is not the nucleus of the cell. It's the membrane. It's the interface between it and the surface. It's kind of like, if we were to look at a human and say, what is the boundary between you and the outside, and where's the intelligence that relates you to your outside? It would be your skin. It would be your mucous membranes inside your nose, and it would be your skin that you can touch and feel. And it's weird to think that it's that intelligent, but at the cellular level, the surface is the actual key to what's going on. Now, certainly the DNA, which is stored knowledge, is in the nucleus, and that area holds the knowledge of what you inherit. However, there is quite a bit of knowledge that is revealed to us through epigenetics, which means the environment. So as the environment impacts on us and we get exposed to light and different frequencies of light and sound and different frequencies of sound and temperature and different pressure, and of course chemicals in our environment, our body reacts to that and decides what it's going to do and which genes it's going to turn on. And that's called the epigenetic effect, which is more powerful, most scientists agree, than the genetic effect, generally, in almost all cases. So the mechanisms involved are, we've got to get the heavy metals out, and we've got to get them out of the cell. And once they've been kicked out of the cell by alpha lipoic acid and by other natural cell mechanisms, by just eating good fats and good proteins and good trace minerals, the body tends to naturally expel these heavy metals. Some of them are sweated out, but most of them are eliminated through either the urine or the stool. So on its way to get from the cell, wherever that cell is in your body where the heavy metal is stored, to get out of your body through feces and urine, it's got to get there. So the first step of coming out of the cell is it goes into the extracellular fluid and it gets picked up by the lymphatics. The lymphatics drain to the veins, and the veins drain to the heart, and the heart then pumps it through the lungs, and it becomes arterial blood that's oxygenated. That blood then goes to your kidneys and it goes to your guts. And when it goes to your kidneys, it gets filtered out and becomes urine. And that heavy metal would be carried out, ultimately filtered through that urine and hopefully cleared through the urine. When that blood goes to the gut, it's going to begin to perfuse the gut. It's going to it's going to allow the nutrients that have come across the gut membrane into your body from all the foods you eat to absorb that food, and it's going to go to the liver. And at the liver, it's going to pick up heavy metals like mercury. It's going to ultimately, bile will be formed from that blood, where your pancreas and liver will grab a hold of material and water that's in that blood and manufacture bile and release that bile into the gallbladder if you've got one. If you don't, that's okay. The ductwork of the liver and the ductwork of the pancreas is quite large enough that it can cover the fact that you've lost a gallbladder. So if you've lost a gallbladder, you still have the capacity to store bile in what's left of the liver and pancreas, because there's lots of ductwork in there, lots of room. So don't worry if you've had your gallbladder removed already. Now, if it's been removed, there's probably a reason for it, and we need to get into that, which we'll do in another video. However, once that blood that made it through into your guts, that was cleaned and oxygenated, made it into your circulation and made it to your guts, that becomes bile. The bile is then secreted by the liver and pancreas, manufactured and secreted into the gallbladder, and then it goes out through a little tract, a little pipe, and that's the common bile duct, and it goes to the sphincter of Oddi, and that's in the small intestine, right up in your upper abdomen, lower chest, just below your lungs and below your diaphragm. And that bile is green, and it goes in and it's full of enzymes and it's full of things that help you digest your fats and your proteins. And it is often full of recycled heavy metals. When humans have heavy metals in their body, they tend to try to release them in their guts, and then they reabsorb their bile at the end of the intestine and store it again and use it again and release it again. So many people have really toxic bile and they can't get rid of the heavy metals that's in their green bile because they keep reabsorbing it. So if we're going to get rid of that heavy bile, we've got to have the person take some kind of binder. This is not alpha lipoic acid now. Alpha lipoic acid was the first part of the story, which was how do you get the heavy metals out of the cell and into the circulation? This step is how do you get it out of the intestine so that you don't reabsorb it and reclaim it, which our bodies are very efficient at recycling. We're very, very good at recycling. So what you want to do is get some kind of binder, some kind of surface area that can perform adhesion, which is just simple adherence to large amounts of surface area. And one of the simplest ways to do that is activated charcoal. There are several kinds of activated charcoal. There's also other surface area products that are not made of charcoal. Things like glucosamine sulfate. There's, of course, activated charcoal from bamboo. There's shilajit, which is a different kind of material. There's clays. There are humic and fulvic acids, which come from soil. There's all kinds of different things that have varying levels of electric charge, and they can attract heavy metals and stick to them. They don't have to have an electric charge. Charcoal doesn't have a terrible electric charge. It's just a neutral compound, and it's just a lot of surface area. It's all ground up, massive amount of surface area that can stick to the heavy metals and slowly carry them out of the body. Now, I like, and many clinicians and practitioners like, natural forms of binders that work very slowly. They take a little bit of heavy metals out per day in the stool, and yes, they do take out some bile, and that means you may have to replace the bile. The story with the people that are the most sensitive are typically autistic children, and they tend to have really, really sensitive brains and bodies. Their skin will be sensitive, their immune system will be sensitive, their bladders will be sensitive, and so they have to be extremely careful to not overdo the detox process. And in fact, when people do intravenous chelation therapy, sometimes it's too rapid for them. This is not to say that intravenous chelation therapy for heavy metals is always bad or is wrong, just that it's a very careful decision that one must make of how rapidly and aggressively one wants to pull heavy metals out of their body and get rid of them, because in the process of pulling them out, they can get redistributed, redeposited in other places, they can be reclaimed and recycled, and they can be deposited into a more significant tissue. You might take it out of your bone and put it in your brain. You might take it out of your organs and put it into your, brain or your spinal cord, your peripheral nerves, and that might be clinically worse for you. So just be aware that as people try to detoxify from heavy metals, those mechanisms are really important, and they do change behavior. The biochemical roots of heavy metal will affect behavior. It will affect mental health. It will affect counseling. It will affect mood. It will affect how you feel, how you sleep, your energy level, fatigability. And so some of the neurologic symptoms that can happen with a person that's been heavy metal exposed are quite wide. They can have anything from memory loss, short-term or long-term. They can have appearances of dementia, lack of concentration. They can have mood disorders where they are very volatile and they switch moods quickly. They can be what we call mercurial, where there's sudden changes in their state, where they go from super happy to super sad. And some people think that they're bipolar, and maybe they're just mercury poisoned. They can have disorders of sleep and disorders of arousal, where they're very obtunded and sedated, and they act like someone drugged them. On the other hand, they can be very wild, and they can be just very full of energy and almost what we would describe as manic, but it isn't classical mania. It's actually a heavy metal type of toxicity. They can get itching, they can get burning, they can get rashes, and skin can break out. They can get all manner and form of eczema that is confusing, that will make the person and their doctor very confused. So if a person has a lot of symptoms that are neurologic and especially skin-based, they can be quite confused, and their doctor may have diagnosed them with a real solid diagnosis that they think they've seen before. And the problem with heavy metals is they can mimic a lot of other conditions. So you're going to get heavy metals from industrial commercial sites. You're going to get them from construction and destruction of buildings. When you tear down and build buildings, there's a lot of exposure to heavy metals in building materials. There is a lot of heavy metal in pesticides and herbicides. The mechanisms for drugs, many drugs are based on, a lot of antibiotics are based on different metals, and anti-cancer medications, chemotherapies are based on heavy metals. So a person can get exposed to heavy metals through electronics, the off-gassing of electronics as the electronic fans blow. They can blow heavy metals into the air, and a person can breathe not only toxic ozone. Not all ozone is toxic, but the ozone that comes from a computer is quite toxic compared to the ozone produced in the atmosphere. So these neurologic symptoms can be numbness and tingling. They can be peripheral in nature. They can be in your hands and feet and your peripheral nerves, but they can also be in the brain. So they might affect thinking and mood and processing, as well as even your cerebellum, which is the thing in the back of your brain that helps you figure out how to move and how to learn new things. So the cerebellum is involved in a lot of factors. So people can get dizziness. They can get tinnitus, they can get nausea and vertigo, they can be clumsy and uncoordinated and crash into things in an uncharacteristic way. So if you've got a loved one that has some of these symptoms, think about heavy metals and think about doing some kind of a test on them, like a hair test for heavy metals, which is usually accurate for about 4 months of exposure, because it takes time for the hair to grow out, and that gives us a really nice measurement of chronic exposure of heavy metals. And I frequently do urine and stool heavy metals when I'm looking to see about the clearance level, because some of my patients will clear heavy metals preferentially through urine more than stool, or stool more than urine. And I need to know that because they might need a little help with one or the other. They might be inadequate in their clearance, and I need to boost that clearance with some herbal preparation or some kind of thing that drives enzymes to work harder, or some kind of mechanism that works more in the gut versus the kidney, or the kidney versus the gut. Certainly, people can sweat out things like mercury and aluminum. They can sweat them out in a sauna, but most of the heavy metals are not sweated out. Most of the heavy metals are eliminated again through urine and feces, which means pooping and peeing. And so you've got to make sure that we're doing that and that we're cleaning it out and we're not reclaiming most of our bile, which is what we do. So watch my other videos on bile preparation and bile support, because when people do this, they invariably are going to intentionally deplete their bile because it's full of toxic heavy metals. And after they do that, they might find that they're better able to digest fat, because bile is very important digesting fat, and certainly protein, but more fat for our purposes. So when people are intolerant of saturated fat, one of the weird reasons for it could be heavy metals. All right, that's the end of our video for today. Please check out our website, humanconditionlab.com, and look at all the free resources. We've added more this year, and I think you'll see that it grows and grows.